Hey everyone, welcome to Just Chillin Outdoors. I'm John, and today I'm going to walk through a custom off-road fog light build I did for my Ford Bronco backlights. This was using the factory modular bumper that Ford offers. So this modular bumper makes accessory installs straightforward, perfect for adding lights, winches, or even a bull bar to your Bronco. I'm also using the built-in auxiliary switches that my Badlands have, so no firewall drilling or no aftermarket switch clusters within the dash. Instead of going with a pricey kit, I built a flood style setup for around $150 using existing wiring I had. It's clean, functional solution for off-road use only. So quick disclaimer, these lights are meant for off-road use only, they are not street legal. So with that out of the way, let's get into the build. Alright, first materials. Before we get into the wiring or mounting, let's talk a bit about the materials I use for this build, aside from the lights and the brackets themselves. So I ran 14 gauge wire throughout the setup. It was a pretty solid choice for low voltage accessories like this. To keep everything sealed and protected, I used waterproof silicone at the key points around the lights as well as around the wires when I soldered them. I also used solder, as I just mentioned, to solder the lights to the wiring so I could wire them into the engine bay. Also used these really cool solder seal wire connectors. It made for a clean, waterproof, or really water resistant connection in the engine bay without having to bring out my soldering iron. Finally, for a good factory look, you might say, I wrapped the wiring in this wire loom, then reinforced a few spots with some electrical tape to keep them protected. As far as the tools I used, it was a pretty simple kit. So the modular bumper takes a T40 Torx bit, and I just use a ratchet to remove and add the bolts there. So basic wire cutters and strippers for the wires themselves, and as I mentioned earlier, I use a soldering iron. So really nothing fancy here, but all of these tools and these materials made it really easy to assemble the lights to the brackets and within the Bronco in a smooth, solid setup. Alright, next let's talk about the lights and brackets used in this setup. Alright, so for the off-road lights that I'm putting in the fog lights area of the Bronco, I'm starting with these mounts that will go in the fog light. So the Bronco's modular bumper has 3 screws in that fog light area. I don't think any of the models of the Bronco come with fog lights from the factory, but I think their assumption was you can add your own lights there, so they've designed it in a way to where you can mount something. Kind of the principle behind these is that the modular bumper screws go in here, and then your lights go in here on these sides. So kind of, if you're looking straight on, the lights will kind of hang down from the Bronco right here, and then shine out through the fog light place. The lights that I'm using is this big one right here, and then these 2 smaller ones to the side. I kind of grappled with a few different ideas. I started with just these 2 lights right here, but I was like, I think I need a third one, and I think there's enough amperage on the 10 amp circuit that the Bronco's aux switch could take it, so I went with that. And then this one, I believe this is the passenger side. Let me get the screen here. This is the passenger side, so this would go in right here, and then these 2 little ones will go in right here and right here, so kind of get the idea. And these little ones put out a decent amount of light from the testing I did, but the kind of housing around them isn't all that high quality. These were advertised on Amazon as being waterproof. So was this one. This one's a more well-known one called Nightlight. It's the brand, but these smaller ones, I decided to take off the housing and put some silicone kind of in the inside here, and I'll kind of show some pictures of that as I talk here. But I put some silicone in there and screwed them back in. You can kind of tell job wasn't the best. Actually, the other ones on the finished bumper that I will show were a little bit worse, but nothing terrible. And then this one, as I put it back in, the screw stripped, unfortunately. So I just ended up really siliconing it down right here and here. But I have some more confidence that with the silicone, they won't leak. That's my biggest concern. But these smaller lights right here, really bright compared to this one. This one is bright, but not as bright. But once they're kind of screwed on there, I'll silicone these ends right here, and then this side right here. And then I kind of run the wires together in parallel. I solder the wires together. I put some kind of marine epoxy so that the wiring connections will be waterproof, and then wrap some electrical tape around them. And then I have this wiring cover that I put everything to zip tie together, and it should be one nice single wire strand coming out from the 3 lights. All right, so this is essentially what I'm doing here. I have these 3 wires coming out from the 3 lights. I've got all the red in parallel, all the black, all the ground in parallel, and I'm gonna solder these together. And then this wire runs down. I'll sheath it and it will run up to the switch of the Bronco. But once these are soldered nice and firm and snug, I will apply some marine epoxy to waterproof them, and then some electrical tape to kind of combine them together. So this is the final product with the marine sealant. It is a type of marine epoxy, so you can use it to glue things together in a boat. It's supposed to work under the waterline for a boat, so it should adequately seal these electrical connections together. Obviously, it doesn't look the best, but put some electrical tape around it and seal it up, and it will be fine. The big concern here is just preventing water from getting to the electrical connections to prevent corrosion over time. I've also added a little bit of clear silicone around the wiring ends of the lights, so water doesn't get in there. Hopefully it's already sealed from the factory, but that's just a double protection. All right, so I got the lights all bolted together. I have the driver's side right here and the passenger side right here. Everything's been siliconed down, everything's bolted together, everything's wired up. Now, the only step left is to install them to the Bronco modular bumper and wire everything to the aux switches. You can see that you got the main light here and the 2 smaller lights. I think the bolts should be tight enough. I didn't torque anything to like a specific spec. I just got them as tight as I could get. But they should be easy enough. You can see this one still moves a little bit, but it's pretty difficult. They should be easy enough to tighten in the bumper. It'll also be nice to maybe adjust the angles once I see how they shine from the vehicle. And then everything's been silicone back here, up around here, and then wired, soldered, waterproofed, and I got this nice covering to keep everything protected. So wiring them to the vehicle should be pretty straightforward. Just basically have to get the wires up to the aux switch around the engine bay, make sure it clears everything, doesn't touch anything that's going to be super hot, doesn't get in the way of the fan. I have these little wire connectors from Amazon to wire to the aux switch and connect everything together. They essentially seal with heat to the wire, and then this is supposed to be this low melt solder that kind of holds everything together. So not sure how they're going to work. They're supposed to be waterproof without any modifications, but I think at least when I have to bring 2 wires together with 1 wire, as I wire the driver and passenger together, I'm going to add like a little bit of silicone just to make sure it is waterproof. Besides, it's in the engine bay, so I don't think there's going to be much water intrusion. So super excited to get these on and see how they look. Alright, time for the exciting part. Let's jump into the install onto the Ford Bronco. So the plan of attack was pretty straightforward. I'm going to mount the lights onto the bumper, and then I'm going to run the wiring up into the engine bay, and then from there I'll make a path with the wiring around the engine into the aux switch location, and then connect everything together and tie everything down. And it should hopefully be pretty simple. Alright, so I finally have it wired. I haven't tucked everything away yet, but I made sure the wiring works, so press switch number 3 right here. Got extra light. So I got the wiring back around here, and up through here. And I just gotta tuck some things that pass some things, but I have everything wired up right here, and it looks to be working great so far.
3 weeks later.
Alright, so I finished the install. Well, it's probably really been about like 3 weeks since I finished it. I actually took the Bronco on a 1,000-mile road trip, round trip to Florida and back, so I got a good test of the waterproofing to the cases back here, and fortunately there are no leaks I can see so far. Fingers crossed there's nothing lurking in the behind the lenses, but they've been looking really good. But to kind of explain what I did here, I ran the wires up, you might be able to see it poked back there. I ran this one up here around the air intake, and this one there's a very narrow spot by the battery that I ran up. That one took a little bit of finessing to get up. So I ran one for each light, and this one just zip tied around under the ECU and around to where the aux switches are, and this one's pretty simple, just up and around here. I used some of those not heat sink, but wire solder crimps that kind of melt on and solder the wire together, as well as seal it off. I'll show a picture as I'm talking about it here, but I use those up and around here. You can't really see it because I covered everything up, but I use those to connect the wires together, and then I used just a single strand of the wire I had to come to the aux switch. So there's one of those little solder connectors right here covered in electrical tape, and then I just went to the ground, common ground right here. And I just used the owner manual to find out what wire that the switch I wanted to use went to. So
This is switch 3, which is the first 10 amp circuit. The other two are 15 and 30 amp. 30 amp on switch 1 and 15 amp on switch 2. So I wanted to reserve those for more powerful accessories I might add in the future. But you can kind of see from the factory, they come taped off or sealed off right here, and you just have to expose it. So pretty simple install. I think it took me about an hour and a half doing everything, including bolting it on, which you can see right here. Bolted it right here. Hardest part was just getting them soldered together, because you have to be really careful not to overheat it. But if you underheat it, it's not going to connect and it's not going to hold. So really simple install. I'm glad it's holding up well so far. No heat issues on the wires. This protector is pretty high temperature, so it keeps everything safely in place, and it just makes it look more professional. So yeah. Alright, so here's a good demonstration looking out in the woods here. So no headlights, no nothing. I think I just have some running lights you can barely see. So with the aux switch only, that's the light you get. So it kind of just looks like headlights, but you can see it's a bit more spread out here and a little bit more spread out here, and it's illuminating the trees up there. And then turn it back off with just the Bronco headlights. See, it's very narrow and cut as headlights should be, and doesn't cut out as much to the left or the right, you know, so it doesn't blind drivers. With the brights, it's a bit more focused towards the middle and lights up the area a little bit more. Nothing crazy, obviously. And then with just normal headlights and the aux switch on, much more brighter. Not as easy to tell with the camera, but definitely spread out well more. Obviously, if there's not a lot of stuff around you, there's not much for it to reflect off of, and it's not going to be as bright, since it's really just trying to flood the entire area. But here it is with brights. Doesn't make much of a difference, to be honest. But overall, it does a really good job of lighting up the area. Let me just turn off the headlights so you can see. So without the headlights, still does a great job of just lighting everything up and lighting up the night. Alright, so coming out here, show off. I don't have the headlights on, just the LEDs, but you can see how bright it looks. It looks awesome with just the running lights.
Well, thank you for watching. This was a really fun and simple first modification to my Ford Bronco. Super excited to take the Bronco out there to the trails, do some off-roading, do some camping, and see how these lights work out there on the trail. If you want to read the blog I made for this, go check out justchillinoutdoors.com. I made a quick blog on the DIY of this, and there's some more details if you're interested in doing this yourself. Thank you.